Once upon a time, there was serious political corruption, including ongoing vote fraud in a Tennessee county. The U.S. Justice Department knew for years that fraud was happening, but they didn't do anything about it. So the citizens of the county had to solve the problem with force. But there was just one problem. The most capable and energetic young men were out of town. They were over in Europe fighting Hitler and getting periodic letters from home telling them just how bad the corruption was getting and what was going on in the county. The crooked mayor and the crooked sheriff of that county were Democrats, and they'd been elected on the coattails of the highly popular President FDR. They appointed criminal convicts from the prisons as deputies, and they seized control of the schools and the newspapers. Nobody could get a job there without the permission of the ruling elite. And so they did whatever they wanted in the county to the weak and the unprotected. And so the scene there in the county was really ripe for a confrontation when the war ended and the soldiers came home angry in 1945. But the ruling elite had the upper hand, and they made sure that the young war survivors knew it. The crooked deputies would target these young returning GIs if they could get them alone on the street or in an alley, to bully them, to shake them down for all that cash that they brought back from the war. Every soldier got mustering out pay. And so this is how they treated them. If they didn't just simply beat them up and steal the money, they would give them tickets and citations unjustly for disorderly conduct, public drunkenness, or loitering. And so by the very next summer, the soldiers had had enough. Everybody in the county had had enough. They knew the only way to get rid of the corruption was through the electoral process and just get these guys out. So the soldiers recruited from among themselves battle-hardened combat veterans to run for every single office in the August 1946 election. And the toughest of the tough of them ran against the corrupt sheriff. He had seen combat in North Africa, and he was ready to fight politically. And that's how they were fighting. Local business leaders were really behind them. They were thrilled. They helped fund the GI ticket, which chose this campaign slogan to run on. Your vote will be counted as cast. And as the election drew near, of course, the crooked sheriff was a little bit worried. He hired 200 additional deputies, mostly from neighboring counties and some from out of state. He paid them the equivalent of $600 to $700 a day to intimidate voters on Election Day and poll watchers and to help rig the vote counting. Now the soldiers quickly and lawfully appealed to the governor and to the attorney general for help and protection. Nothing happened. There was no help coming. Nobody was coming to them. They had to do this themselves. As voting began on Election Day, cheating was visible everywhere. County citizens who saw it and who protested all these illegalities at the polls were quickly arrested and silenced and then taken to jail. One deputy prevented an old black farmer from casting his ballot after he had it all filled out. And when the farmer objected and a GI poll watcher objected, the dirty cop hit the farmer straight in the mouth with brass knuckles. And the old man dropped his ballot. He tried to get away from the deputy, who then shot the farmer in the back. There was a group of women who were there to watch the polls, and they were witnesses to this. And of course, they were ordered out of the building, but they refused to leave until they were forced out. So at this point, the corrupt sheriff, things were heating up around the county. He simply ordered all polls to close early, and then he ordered the ballot boxes to be carried under guard to the jail for counting in secret. But he was only able to get a few of the boxes into the jail before poll watchers simply began following procedure, counting the ballots from all those other boxes across the county. And the very first tallies that they were getting in those first few minutes of counting the votes showed a 3-1 lead for the soldiers. But intimidation by the deputies was running all over the county. It escalated as they collected all the boxes. They retreated into the jail with them. And it was at this point that the soldiers looked at each other and said, what are we going to do? What do we do at this point? We've lost the ballots. So 60 of these soldiers drove to the county armory. They took keys from the caretaker. They armed themselves with 60 .30-06 Enfield rifles. These were rifles that had been invented and created and tested in World War I. They got 2 Thompson submachine guns and ammo. And by 5 p.m., then they came back to the jail. By 5 p.m., thousands of citizens had gathered at the jail to protest. Inside, corrupt government officials, corrupt election commission officials, and about 50 deputies were all in there allegedly doing what? Counting the votes. But what they were really doing was filling out tally sheets to get the results they wanted to get. They were preparing to certify a victory for the Democrats. And outside, the veterans had a different idea. They had organized to order the officials to bring the boxes out for open and honest counting and accountability. One soldier remembers shouting this phrase, and this is the direct quote: "You damn thief grabbers, bring them damn ballot boxes out of there." And then he heard a bolt click from inside, and then a gunshot, and the firefight commenced. And this was a really serious gunfight. There were, we don't know how many rounds were fired, many hundreds, in the low thousands of rounds. The soldiers demanded the Democrats to surrender, and they refused and just kept shooting. The volleys of fire continued into the night, ceasing only long enough for the soldiers to demand another surrender, again and again, but the Democrats refused every time, until dynamite placed on the porch of the jail blew the door down at 3:30 a.m. And it was at this point that the corruption of the Democratic machine ended, right then. Immediately, the GIs phoned a state official to come confirm the vote count and to certify the election. And here's what was found in the jail once they got inside. Those tally sheets that they'd been filling out, by the Democrats' tally sheet, to commit fraud, the check mark scored Democratic votes 15-1 against the soldiers. It was all a farce. It was all a fraud. These were fake numbers. And when the final official tally was completed by counting the actual ballots and certifying them and verifying the votes, the soldiers had won by a landslide. So, here's the end of the story. After order was restored in the county, all those rifles from the battle that had come from the armory, they were cleaned by the soldiers. They were returned to the place of the storage facility. So what can we learn from this true story? We need to remember history and learn from it. There may be lessons to apply. What these patriotic soldiers did was no revolutionary looting operation or revolutionary rioting act, just for the sake of burning the system down. Of course they were fed up with the system. It was corrupt. But there were ways to restore it, and they wanted to do it lawfully, and that's what they pursued. This was no mob action on their part. It was a necessary response to lethal force on the part of the Democrats to murder, to the threat of murder. It was the measured overthrow of illegal and illegitimate criminal activity. And this is how the citizens were able to restore law, order, and legitimacy to a county deeply infected with corruption.